Here we are right by Clear Creek, and there's so many good spots to stop along the river and see what kind of plants are growing, go on a little hike. I found a really cute one right here. This one's called Wood Nymph, and the flowers are single and nodding. Often they're fragrant, and they can be up to about an inch wide. You have these 5 white petals, and they're pretty waxy and they're fused at the base. It'll flower usually June to August, and it's a really short little plant, only maybe 5 inches tall at the max. You'll find this one again along creek sides, in dark forest, in moss mounds, kind of like this one here, and in bogs. And this one you'll find growing anywhere from montane to subalpine life zones. Here's another one of those wood nymphs that I just showed you, and I was hoping maybe you could see the underneath part, since I could get to this one a little easier. And so that's what the wood nymph looks like underneath, but they'll always be drooping like this. And it's such a cute, delicate flower. So again, here we are a little bit up from Clear Creek along a little stream, mountain runoff that ends up draining into Clear Creek. And this is cowbane, and it's a just really delicate little flower. There's a couple that kind of look the same, that have this white flat top umbel structure. There's cow parsnip, there's lovage, there's cowbane, there's even yarrow. And if you use the booklet, it will help you identify what you've got. This one is cowbane, and it has these tiny, delicate flowers. As I said, are in umbels. It's got 5 whitish petals, which I don't know if you can really see that well because they're so itsy bitsy. But it's a very delicate plant, and it likes growing by these moist areas. And we'll probably see some cow parsnip later, and you'll see how different the two are. This one's much shorter, and as I said, much more delicate than the cow parsnip. It's a very robust plant. You can often tell this plant by its leaves. It has 7 leaflets, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and it has these blunt teeth. A lot of times, if plants are toothed, they'll be more sharply toothed, but this one you can tell the leaves are very blunt, and so that's a characteristic to look for in this plant as well. This one likes areas in the montane up to subalpine life zones, and again loves these marshy, boggy areas that are along streams. Here's another plant, another white flower that's growing with our cowbane that we just identified. This one's called heartleaf bittercress. And again, you can use your book to reference to make sure that you've got the right plant. There are a couple again that look similar. There's Drummond's rock cress, and there's mountain candy tuft. Now you can tell this one because it has these cordate shaped leaves, which just basically means heart shaped. And so that's a telltale sign that you've got heartleaf bittercress. Just like the cowbane, it grows streamside and really moist meadows and forests. It has these clusters of white flowers on a raceme, and you can tell it's in the mustard family because it has 4 petals. And most mustard family members are 4-petaled. This one can grow up to 30 inches, so almost 3 feet. These here are probably 1.5 feet. And this one you can find, again, in moist areas from montane to subalpine. Here we have one of our native strawberries. This is the woodland strawberry, and we really have 2 species of strawberries that you'll see commonly. One is the wild strawberry. That one tends to grow in meadows and thickets. And this one, though, is the woodland strawberry, and this one you'll find more in open forests and in moister, shadier spots than the wild strawberry. They both look very similar other than that. They both have these 5 rounded white petals that are cup-shaped. The stems are hairy on both of them. This one grows to a little bit taller height than the wild strawberry. This one can get up to 8 inches. And so if you happen to find them growing side by side, you will see that this one's a bit taller. This is a delicate little flower. I'll try to get it in focus. This one's called stellaria or starwort. It's a very small, slender flower. It looks like it has 10 petals, but actually the petals are just deeply cleft, and it only has 5. This one will flower all summer long, from May to August. It has opposite leaves, which maybe we can see here. The stems are angular and very slender and very erect. It can grow to about 8 inches tall. Here's another one over here, growing with the strawberries. And this one you'll find usually in moister areas, although right here on this little trail, it's a little bit drier spot, but it's still got some shade from the forest, so it isn't completely exposed to the sun. And that's called starwort. So when I was on Guanella Pass taking a hike, I believe I found a dusky penstemon or dusky beard tongue that was a really deep purple, and I mentioned that sometimes they will be very white in color. And here I found one on Berthoud Pass that is very white. It has a little bit of purple tinge to it, but it definitely is a different color than the one we saw on Guanella Pass. Here's another pretty little flower growing along our trail. This is an arnica, and we have several species of arnica. This one happens to be heartleaf arnica, and it's pretty distinguishable by looking at its leaves. These are very much cordate, heart-shaped. There's a broadleaf arnica and a subalpine arnica, and you won't see those as commonly as the heartleaf one. It's got these bright yellow ray and disc flowers. They can get up to usually 3 inches, but usually you'll see them more like this, maybe an inch, inch and a half. The leaves are opposite. You can see here's 2 of the heart-shaped leaves, and they're opposite each other on the stem. The stem is hairy. And this one can grow to about 2 feet tall. This one is probably about a foot tall right here. And you'll find these in shady, moist forests. This plant here is called sulfur flower. And this is one of my favorites. It's just really hardy, and a lot of times you'll find it growing in rock outcrops. Right here it's kind of growing in an open area in the forest. These don't mind a little bit drier areas. You could find them even on roadsides and rocky slopes. These flowers are in an umbel, usually 2 to 3 inches maybe across, and they're this whitish pink color, and as they mature they'll turn red in the fall. And again, it's got basal leaves. These stalks, you won't see any leaves on the flower stalk, no stems, just this mat forming layer of basal leaves. And there's different varieties. You may see some variation in the field in color. Again, they can be creamy white to pink to turning red later in the fall. In County, we have 2 different types of bluebells you may commonly see when you're out hiking and exploring. One is called lance-leaf bluebells, and they have very narrow, lance-shaped leaves. The other one here is tall chiming bells, and they're both in the same genus. This one is much taller. It has these more rounded leaves. They aren't so lamp-shaped. And what's kind of cool about this plant is the flowers will often start out pink, as you can see here, and as they mature, they'll turn to this lovely bluish purple lavender color. This one you'll find often by streams. We have a little stream that's running right here, so it likes the wet soil, whereas the other bluebells often you'll find in drier spots. This one you'll find from the montane all the way up to the alpine life zones. Hopefully you can see this delicate little flower. This is called Alpine Speedwell. It's a Veronica, and it has these purplish blue clusters of flowers. The petals are rounded, although they're so tiny, it's kind of hard to see. This one has opposite leaves, and they're oval in shape. Let's see if I can zoom in on that. It has a very hairy stem. This one can grow to about 12 inches tall. These right here are maybe 6 inches. It really likes wet areas like bogs and stream sides. You can hear the little creek behind me. And this one will be found in subalpine and alpine areas. And as I mentioned, I'm on a hike on a little trail near Jones Pass. There's Berthoud Pass up there. And I'm just in a little mountain meadow here with a little stream. There's our bluebells, lots of yellow cinquefoil, and sulfur flower growing among the grasses and sedges in here. And the white paintbrush is just starting to flower. So just down the trail, a couple feet, we found woods rose or wild rose. You may hear it referred to as either. And this is one of our native little roses. Pretty typical looking for a rose. It's got these bright pink petals. And it's just starting to bloom. This one's got buds on top of its very sharp, spiky stem. So here we have subalpine larkspur. It's a delphinium. And this one can grow up to 6 feet tall. This one's probably maybe close to 3 feet tall. It has these really beautiful clusters of flowers and a terminal spike. And it's actually the sepals that are this dark purple, not the flowers. The flowers are rather inconspicuous. It has really large leaves. They're palmately shaped, meaning it looks like a palm. And you will find these in shady areas, along stream banks, those kind of locations. And you can find this growing anywhere in the subalpine or alpine life zone. Here we have elegant death camas. It's growing in a more shaded portion of the forest and a little bit moister. This plant does have an alkaloid that, when ingested, can be poisonous to both humans and animals, so make sure you don't eat this plant when you're out on a hike. Before it's blooming, it does look like it could be a grass. These long, skinny leaves here are the leaves for this plant, but it is definitely not in the grass family. It's in the Trillium family. This one can grow up to 20 inches tall, and you'll find this from the foothills all the way up to the alpine. As long as it finds a spot that's a little bit moister, it'll be a happy plant. Here we have mountain parsley, and usually you find this at a little bit lower elevations. Right now we're probably at about 9,500 feet, and this one usually is a bit more of a montane species. You don't find it as commonly at elevation. If you do, it's much, much shorter. But here it is, and it's got these really delicate yellow umbels on long, skinny stalks. And this one often is an early bloomer. You might see this one near the beginning of the season. Here's cow parsnip. And when you see how different this looks, when you kind of see the video side by side, you can see how different it actually looks than cowbane, which was so much more delicate. They both like moist areas, but this one is such a large plant with these thick, hollow stems, and the leaves are quite large, larger than your hand. Again, this one has these flat-topped umbels, but this one is pretty distinguishing. It's a little bit sweet-smelling, and it can grow to even 8 feet tall sometimes in the right conditions. You'll see these in willow thickets, along stream sides and wet meadows, and it's pretty versatile in its ability to grow in different areas. You'll find this in the foothills all the way up to subalpine. Here's another great flower called monk's hood, and it has these flowers that are in an open raceme. The petals, like some of the other plants I've talked about, are negligible. It's the sepals that are very showy, and usually they're this purple color, although sometimes you'll see monk's hood in white. The upper sepal actually resembles a hood. Let's see if I can zoom in here a little bit on that. And the open then, or the bottom end is then open to pollinators. So very cool adaptation to one, protecting the pollen and providing access for pollinators. This one will usually flower a little bit later in the season, usually July to September, sometimes a little earlier. The leaves themselves are very jaggedly toothed, as you can see here, and they can get to be quite large. They can be even up to potentially 6 or 8 inches or so on really large plants. The plant itself can grow to be 6 or 7 feet tall, so again a very tall, showy plant. A lot of times you'll find them clustered. This one's kind of growing by itself. And these tend to like wet areas, stream sides, boggy areas. Sometimes in willow thickets you'll see these growing. You'll often see it growing with the subalpine larkspur, and they're both a purple color, so sometimes they can be confusing between the two. And this one you'll find growing from the montane all the way up to the alpine life zones. And that is called monk's hood. So right now I'm probably at about 11,000 feet, and here is parrot's beak or sickle-top lousewort. You might hear it called by either name. It has these white flowers with 2 lips, and they're clustered on top of kind of a reddish stem, if you can see that. It's got simple leaves. They're lance-shaped, and they often also have that kind of reddish tint to them. Almost looks purple here. This one will grow to about 2 feet tall or so. These here are probably about a foot. There's a whole cluster of them right in here. This one flowers a little bit later in the season, July and August. And you'll find this in the montane and subalpine forests, like where I'm at right now. Here's another big patch of that parrot's beak, or pedicularis. I'm getting closer to the top of the mountain. I've kind of come upon this grassy field between the trees, and there's a lot of bistorte growing here. See if I can get a close-up of one. And bistorte's something you'll find at high elevations. A lot of times it's one of the taller plants you'll see growing. It's got this cylinder of dense white flowers on top of a long, skinny stem. The leaves are also very long. They're narrow and mostly basal. And again, this one you'll find in subalpine and alpine areas. And this one will flower usually June to August, all summer long. There's another type of bistorte that actually produces bulblets to kind of circumvent the flowering process, since the flowering season is so short in these high elevation areas. And hopefully I can find one of those as well. Here we have an example of Krummholz, which means crooked tree in German. There's a couple of them here. I'll have to zoom out in a minute to show you a little better. But what this is a grouping of trees that are very densely clumped. And you'll find them in subalpine and alpine areas where you're getting to just around timberline. And these trees grow like this because of the fiercely cold winds and snow conditions that are at these elevations. And so in order to actually grow, they will clump together, and they're able to grow because they shelter each other in the snow. And you'll notice that the trunks are often very dense. I'll walk up to this one so you can kind of see down in here. The trunks are very dense, but as you go up, the trees are very short relative to their cohorts at lower elevations, and very dense at the bottom. And this is called Krummholz. You'll see this at high elevations. And then we've got some really beautiful little Jacob's ladder growing underneath this patch. And they generally like these sheltered locations. Here's another grouping of Krummholz, and you can really see how bent or crooked tree in German, how crooked the trunks are on this. You can see kind of where the snow sets and stays for a large part of the year, and how closely they grow together. Alpine plants have so many neat adaptations in order to survive under the severe conditions they face at this high elevation. Here's this little buckwheat. We saw one of these earlier that was probably at least a foot tall. And this one is only about an inch tall. Got a little insect on it too, pollinating. And a lot of alpine plants will grow like this. Here's another one that forms kind of a mossy mound. And here's a little cinquefoil. And what else do we have here? There's another little cinquefoil and a tiny little grass. And these plants grow so small, they nestle themselves between the rocks, and that helps protect them against the cold, freezing winds at the high elevation. Here's another alpine plant taking shelter near and underneath this rock to protect it from the winds. This is moss campion. And usually the flowers are a little bit more pink than this. These are very light pink. And you can see the 5 petals that it has. And each petal has a tiny notch in it at the end. And this also grows in a mounding, matting form with the really tiny leaves, and this also protects it from the wind. The little moss-like structure that the leaves form helps catch water and soil, but protects the plant itself from the wind. And next to it we've got a tiny alpine clover, tiny mountain parsley, which we also have seen at lower elevation and much, much taller. Here's some more of the clover growing very small at about 11,500 feet. One last little look at Krummholz. I just wanted to show you this one because it's so short. These trees are maybe 3 feet tall at their tallest. And here is another example of plants making the best of their environment. We have a lumroot, an aster, and a sandwort all nestled into the crack of this rock to help protect it from these fierce winds. You can see how windy it is in the video, and probably can hear it a bit too. And this really provides them the protection that they need to help to grow and reproduce at this elevation. Here's mountain dryad, or white mountain avens, also growing at very high elevation and nestled within these rocks here. It's got these creamy white flowers with 8 petals. They're oval shaped. And it also has 8 sepals. And then it's got all these stamens, yellow stamens in the center. The leaves are really thick and fleshy. And they have these lobed edges. They aren't really toothed. They're more lobed. And this plant forms a cushion again, protection against the wind. This one will flower from July to August. And it does prefer these alpine, gravelly slopes where I'm at right now. And this is actually, interestingly enough, a dwarf shrub. So it's not a herbaceous plant, it's actually a dwarf shrub. And the styles on this will become these really cool fuzzy plumes once the flowers mature. And that's mountain dryad. Here's some beautiful purple fringe growing with cinquefoil and a little sagebrush here among the rocks. It has these tiny purple flowers that are tightly packed in this spike. And what's really conspicuous about these is these protruding yellow stamens. Very distinguishable plant based on the stamens. The leaves are finely divided and a little bit silvery and hairy. This one can grow up to 12 inches tall. The one here is probably about 5 inches or so, protected by this rock. And you can see this growing from montane to alpine. It likes dry, exposed areas. You'll often see it along road cuts or trails as you're hiking. And look at these cinquefoils here, or potentillas. We saw these growing at a little bit lower elevation that were much, much smaller because they were more exposed to the wind. Or here we're easily probably close to 12,000 feet, and these are quite large. They're protected by this rock outcrop, and because of that they're able to grow much larger than other plants of its species, more exposed to the elements. So here I am just around the corner from those large rocks, and the cinquefoil is only about 1 inch tall because it has no protection from the wind. And right next to it is the cutest little plant, so tiny. This is the pygmy bitterroot that I talked about earlier, but look how tiny it is. Maybe about 1/2 inch to 1 inch at this elevation. Here we have the beautiful sky pilot, and it is related to Jacob's ladder. You can kind of see it has somewhat similar leaves. They're a little bit more feathery looking than Jacob's ladder. And this has this kind of ball-shaped cluster of flowers. The flowers themselves are actually cone-shaped, but the inflorescence often looks like a round ball. Sometimes there's less flowers, especially at this elevation, but this particular one is very protected by a group of crumholts, and so it is quite large and round. It can grow to 12 inches tall, and it is mainly found in the alpine life zone, and you'll usually find it on rugged, rocky slopes between cracks of rocks, and here among the trees, the crumholts. And this one has not a very pleasant odor. A lot of times it's a musky smell, and its nickname is sometimes skunkweed, which for such a pretty flower, not a very pretty name. I like sky pilot much better. It's nice to get out of the wind and back down a little bit in the shade where it's so much cooler. Here's a little mountain stream along the trail, and it's beautiful. I don't know how much you can see, but there's red Indian paintbrush, purple fleabane, Perry's primrose, globe flower, tall chiming bells, cinquefoil, bistorte, willows, all sorts of things growing right here. It's beautiful. Here's Perry's primrose. It loves these moist stream-side locations. It's such a bright, brilliant flower. You can't miss it if you see it on a hike. The magenta or pink petals are just so vivid and vibrant. It's just beautiful. It has very thick basal leaves that get wider near the tips, and it can grow to maybe 1.5 feet or so. The flowers have 5 petals with a little yellow center. And you'll find this in subalpine and alpine moist areas along little creeks and in bogs. Its relative, the fairy primrose, grows in the alpine area and is obviously much, much shorter. And hopefully I will find one of those on my hike as well. So I'm getting towards the end of my hike here near Berthoud Falls and Clear Creek. And I came across this very showy cluster of fireweed. Now we have 2 species of fireweed in Clear Creek County. We have alpine fireweed, which grows at higher elevations and is much, much shorter. And then we have this fireweed, which grows to be several feet tall and is incredibly showy. And 99% of the time, if you see a fireweed, it's probably going to be this species. This one has 4 rounded petals. A lot of time they're this pink color, but sometimes they can be a bit more purplish. And they can be up to 1 inch wide. And they're in this elongated raceme, as you can see here. This one will flower a little later in the season. It's just starting now in a lot of places. So you won't see this early season. You'll see this mid to late season. It has lanceolate leaves that are wavy or weakly toothed, which you can see here. It's a perennial that, again, grows quite tall. It can get up to 6 feet tall, and often you'll find this along roadsides, trail sides, forest openings, and this one follows fire often. And so after there's a forest fire, a lot of times this is one of the first wildflowers you'll see popping up in the cleared, burned area. And this one, if I didn't mention, grows from the foothills all the way up to about subalpine life zone. And that is called fireweed.